The subject, of course, is really vast, because what we're talking about is in my mind, the loss of vitality, loss of one of the most important props of any civilizational order, which is its economic and material basis. And in this way, the civilization of Islam, which was very much a mercantilist civilization, it was a civilization of long-term, long-distance trade, commercial partnerships. It was based on exchanges of goods across a vast geographic land area, probably the biggest contiguous area of any civilization in history. And apart from the fact that economic relationships and economic transactions lay at the heart of the world of Islam, it was also overlaid with a very sophisticated and detailed system of regulations, of rulings, of justifications for all kinds of transactions, and their legal and moral bases. In the final analysis, the underlying or the underpinning aspects of all economic transactions in Islam, at least in their ideal form, were rooted in the Quranic legacy and in the prophetic traditions. That is not to say that there was no such thing as an economic man in Islam, or that Muslims in pre-modern times did not act or behave in the way that any businessmen, producers, or consumers did. That's not the argument. The argument is that there always was a form and an ideal which, to a very large extent, determined the boundaries and limits of economic transactions. And there has been enough historical evidence and enough research to confirm the twinning of the legal, jurisprudential, and even moral aspects of economic transactions in Islam with the greatness of the economic aspects of the civilization. And if you look at great historians of the modern period who've investigated the economic history of civilizations, if you look at a person like Fernand Braudel, the famous historian, the great historian of the Mediterranean, he in fact laid all the major innovations of modern commercial life, not to the Italian city-states, which is the received wisdom, but rather to the world of Islam. And I quote directly from him: to admit the existence of these borrowings means turning one's back on traditional accounts of the history of the West as pioneering genius, spontaneous inventor, journeying alone along the road towards scientific and technical rationality. The Muslim trader, the merchant, was an honored figure in Islam. And this compares or contrasts to the attitude of the medieval church to economic life and to the way in which they approached productive activity. And Muslim rulers throughout, whenever there was a modicum of political stability and order, one of their main priorities was to attract to their domain, to their territories, merchants, in modern parlance, businessmen, traders, who were a core underpinning of any of the great states of Islam. And if you look at the way in which Islam's urban culture evolved, it was based not only on the great cosmopolitan centers of Baghdad or Istanbul, but also on great trading cities that punctuated the landscape of Islam from the West, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. All of that seems to have come to a screeching halt sometime around the 17th and 18th century. And when European travelers seeking fabled lands of Islam, of Timbuktu, Samarkand, Golconda, found instead decrepit cities populated by mass of impoverished and abused people. And by the time Napoleon landed in Egypt, which is seen in many ways as being the inflection point at which modernity entered the Muslim world, Egyptians no longer had any use for the wheel, believe it or not. They relied entirely on beasts of burden and animal transport. And since that period, the decline in the standards of the Muslim world has been really unrelenting ever since. And if one excludes the oil-producing countries of the Muslim world, the decline would even be more pronounced. From the Islamic Development Bank statistics, Muslim countries generate only 6% of the world's wealth, while accounting for nearly 22% of its population. And there are statistics like that all around. If you take the combined GDP of all the Muslim countries, majority Muslim countries, they account for something around 13% of that of the West, defined as the United States and the European Union. And many people have pointed the finger at Islam as somehow being responsible for this decline. But reality is really much more complex than that. There's enough evidence, I think, to show that geography is probably as important as the religious or the cultural background of these countries. So if you look at, for example, in Southeast Asia, Malaysia has a better income standard than nearly all the neighboring countries. But still, it has not stopped Islam's detractors from seeing, as it were, the deadening hand of this archaic way of looking at the world, of interacting with the world, as somehow being inimical to economic growth and development. And many of the reasons that have been given by a number of writers, including, I might say, quite well-known academics, as to this relative underachievement has put it down to things like the Muslim prohibition on interest, the poor level of participation in the economies of Muslim worlds by women, supposedly due to the built-in patriarchy of Muslim societies. But again, I think this is a facile and a very easy response to a far more complex phenomenon. And on the other hand, you have people who deny that there is such a thing as an Islamic exceptionalism. Why should Muslims be any different from any other person? And therefore, why should they seek a particular path, an Islamic path, as it were, to human improvement and felicity? But these two arguments, I think, completely miss the point. Islam as a civilization rests on its own terms. It does not rest on the terms of others, how others see it. This is only one aspect of those who care about the response of other cultures and other civilizations to the intrinsic worth, as it were, of the Islamic perspective. But it is more to do with Muslims themselves and how they care to project their outer life, and that is based on an inner consistency which has an outer expression.